All right, so welcome back, grade 9. So we're looking at this source again on immigration. And when we look at a source, first thing we need to do is pick a topic or a theme. We'll look at the source and look at it as one big picture. That's the theme of the source. The big picture theme of this source is immigration. Now, with cartoons, we're trying to find an ideological perspective. An ideological perspective is an opinion. There's an opinion about immigration here. And in order to find that opinion, we must look at nuances or elements within the source. It's often important to look at any wording here. It says now, then, all together, and any labeling. So the individuals have labels. The gentleman at the front, the Conductors Canada, he looks like an RCMP officer. And then in the field, we have a group of 11 others representing various countries. So one of the things we looked at when we just looked at this cartoon together before we were recording it now is sometimes we have to look at, well, what's not there? So one of the things we concluded that isn't there is women. There's no women in the photo. So this is a cartoon from a time when maybe women were not seen as really that important, that they were just seen as an extension of the man. So the men represent the women. So women are not there because they're at home. The men are representing them on their behalf. We also talked about the fact that it's in a field. That's not by accident. They could have drawn it on the corner of what is that? Maine and Portage, right? Portage in Maine and Winnipeg. The windiest corner in North America. The corner of Portage in Maine. Lots of beautiful buildings in the background. The concrete banks. They didn't do it there. They drew it in a field because, as we learned by our last video, immigration policy in the 19th century Canada, we're trying to encourage people to come to Canada to farm. So the field is shown there because that's where many new immigrants would find themselves, would be on their land. What's not on the page, other than women, another group of Canadians that often feel that their voice is not being heard on immigration is Canada's Aboriginal peoples. And the review that we just had of Chapter 5 suggested that Canada's Aboriginal peoples are upset sometimes with immigration because they do equate it with money spent on new Canadians rather than old Canadians. And even just this last week, we have learned that our federal government under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has said that they're going to be unable to provide clean drinking water again this year for all Aboriginal Canadians. So there are some Aboriginal Canadians still on reserves where they have to boil the water, and it's been that case for years and years. And that should be seen as unacceptable. So many Aboriginal Canadians might look at this and feel some concern that the resources of the government are being allocated towards new instead of old Canadians. Another thing that we looked at when we looked at the list here, Germans, Icelanders, Scotsmen, Belgians, etc., is that although it looks very diverse at first glance, they're very homogenized, right? It's all Europeans. It's quite a white group. So even though I, as an Irishman, look at a German or an American or a Russian or an Englishman as different than me, an Englishman is very different than an Irishman. Frenchman is very different than both of us. But people outside of Europe might look at that group and say, well, you're all European. You're basically the same. So it may be a step towards diversity and multiculturalism, two of the big cultural policies that Canada likes to claim to support, but it's still missing Chinese Canadians. It's still missing Asian Canadians in general. It's still missing Africans and people from Latin America. So it is a step towards the multiculturalism that we'll adopt in the 1960s and that Canada tries to identify with today, but maybe it was a step towards it. We do have people gathered in that photo that have a history of war with each other. Englishmen and Frenchmen, although they're not standing next to each other, at least they're standing in the field all together. So perhaps the message is also that in Canada, people that are at odds with each other outside of Canada, like the Irish and the English, or the English and the French, or at times the English and the Germans, or the English and the Americans, may not be at odds now. The Chrome cart might be in Kate's room from last year, because that's where Chuck had it this morning.
For your Chrome cart?
No, your Chrome cart.
No,
Is
Chuck
that?
still has my book.
Oh, okay. Mine is probably next door. Dean had it this morning, and he probably didn't return it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
Oh yeah, no worries. So that's how we break down that cartoon. So when we look at cartoons, we need to consider, what is the intended message? You know, what's the purpose of this cartoon being drawn? What is the intended message? And when we look at the author's intent, we might be saying, who's the audience? Who are they presenting this to? And what is the problem that they're trying to expose? So let's get you to do another cartoon then. And I want you to just see if you can see the intended message. What's the purpose of the cartoon? What's the intent of the cartoon? Let's focus on this one. I'm gonna blow it up a little bit so it's easier to see. Yeah, that makes it real easier to see, Mr. McBride. I can only see half of it. Man, this McBride guy. Whoa. Really? You're gonna do that to me? Thought I'd get rid of that, and then we could see the other half. Oh, maybe that's all they're gonna show us. Okay. That's fair. That's fair. Alright. Then, we'll just deal with this little bit of the cartoon there. It should say Immigration Canada. So, that's the missing part of the cartoon there that you can't see all of. And then there's an immigration border worker sitting here. And we have new Canadians passing by. So, let's see if you can see the intent of the cartoon. And I'm going to try to fix this cartoon so we can see all of it. So, what is the intent of the cartoonist? What message are they trying to, or ideological perspective are they trying to make about Immigration Canada and about immigration in general? Still not there. Alright, let's see if you can come up with it. So looking at the nuances within the source, you look at what he's physically doing. So let's pretend you have a job, and your job is border security. Would the people you work for be happy if you were this gentleman here? Are you doing your job? Is this guy doing his job? No, right? He's not doing his job because he is asleep. Yep. And he's literally, they've drawn in this thing here, the switch, and he's literally asleep at the switch. So that's a bit of a vernacular term that's more used to describe working on the railway. And if you're asleep at the switch, then you might not pay attention when a train approaches, and now you've dangerously allowed a train to enter a track where another train already is. And now they're going to collide and there might be a train derailment. It's very dangerous to be asleep at the switch. So even though this gentleman's not working on the railway, but they're using that metaphor, that story that he's asleep at the switch, and with it is this idea of danger. So what's the danger if our border security is meant to be filtering people, meant to be discriminating and say you can come in and you cannot? What's the danger if our border security is asleep? Give me a worst case scenario. What happens? Worst case scenario, hypothetical.
A terrorist comes into Canada.
A terrorist comes into Canada, right? So border security is asleep, maybe a terrorist comes into Canada. There's movies like Sum of All Fears with Ben Affleck and I believe Morgan Freeman. Great movie. It's about the idea of a dirty bomb, a dirty nuclear bomb being brought into America to be used against Americans. Someone's asleep at the switch, but they allow that in. There's this idea that, and we saw this with our review today of the point system, that some immigrants will not be allowed into Canada if they're a threat to Canadians. But if you're asleep, you might not see the threat. So other than terrorism, what might be something else that a immigrant might bring in with them that could be a threat to Canada? That we would not see if we're asleep? Yes.
A disease.
Sorry, what?
A disease.
Yeah, they might be infected with something. So here we are, October the 5th, 2020, all wearing masks. And I'm not saying that masks in Canada are because of immigration, but we're all wearing masks because of a global pandemic. That it's not that unfathomable to hypothesize that there could be an outbreak that has been contained outside of Canada. And we don't want to import it into Canada. Maybe not a COVID-19, it could be of something else. Could be cholera, could be malaria, could be something. And therefore we must screen for that at the border. Otherwise, we bring that infection in and it spreads and lives can be compromised. So it might be terrorism, could be like a disease. What else could the immigrant come in? Yes?
Whether they're criminals.
Yeah, it could be a criminal. Might be somebody that's coming in to sell drugs or to kidnap people and sell them. Thousands of children are kidnapped every, I'm going to guess, month around the world and are lost to their families forever and are sold into servitude. And if you're asleep at the switch, you might not see that coming into Canada, that threat. And they also might come in. So we have public health concerns, we have criminal concerns, we have terrorist concerns. There might be, yep.
Pedophiles with the country?
Yeah, it could be criminals going either way, right? Or it could be people with a criminal past coming in or leaving out. We don't want to let our criminals out either. We also don't want people to come in with bad ideas. An idea that might destroy Canada. What's an idea that might destroy Canada? An idea that we don't want Canadians to adopt. We don't want somebody coming into Canada whispering this idea to people. What would be the idea that would be whispering? That was me attempting to whisper. I'm not a paid actor anymore. Any ideas that so there would be a time that we didn't want communism, an idea that was toxic that we thought to our stability, the good governance of this country. We didn't want communism to be imported. So we had something called a Red Scare. We didn't want, red was the color of communism. We didn't want to allow that red toxin into Canada. Any other ideas that people in 2020 might be like, man, we really don't want that here? Something to think about. So, that's another cartoon that we can use to analyze, to look at immigration. I'm going to end this video there, and I'll give you one more cartoon to look at outside of the video.